Did you know, 9 days before the Wright brothers flew the world's first aircraft, the smartest man in America dropped his brand new flying machine into the Potomac River. It was 1903, and Samuel Langley had everything you're told you need. He ran the Smithsonian, the world's largest museum, education and research complex. He was an astronomer, professor, and a friend of global presidents. The government at the time handed him $50,000, and he hired the best specialist team in the country. The two men who beat him ran a bicycle shop in Ohio and spent about $1,000 of their own money. So you might wonder, how did those two bike guys outthink the best specialist team on Earth? That's the detail I can't stop thinking about. Langley didn't lose because he was lazy or unlucky or underfunded. He lost because every flight expert in the world was solving the wrong problem. They treated flight as a power problem. Their idea was to build an engine that was super powerful, that could hold the machine right at the sky. On the other hand, the bicycle guys knew something the experts had no way of seeing. Bicycle is unstable by design, and people ride them anyway, because balance can be learned. So to them, flight was a balance problem. At that time, they were the only people on Earth positioned to see that, precisely because they weren't flight specialists. This video is about that kind of seeing. I call it the connector mind. The whole method is 3 moves, and the first one lands in about 60 seconds. If you have spent years feeling vaguely guilty because you never picked one niche, stay. This one is for you, because the advice both you and I grew up on says the opposite. Pick a niche, go deep, become the best in the world at one narrow thing. And that advice isn't wrong. I love depth myself, and depth matters, and I'll show you exactly where it fits. But somewhere along the way, going deep got confused with staying narrow, and those two are different things. Meanwhile, there's a study about what Nobel Prize winners do on their weekends that made me laugh out loud the first time I read it, because it points the other way entirely. That's coming. So here's the plan. The 3 moves of the connector mind, all of them up front, then the evidence, the mechanism, and 1 weekly hour that installs the whole thing. Let's get into it. Move 1. Collect. A little fundamental knowledge about a lot of things. This hits home for all the curious people. If you're curious, you're probably already collecting. Notice the word fundamental. You're not trying to become an expert in 5 different fields. That's 5 decades that you don't have. You're collecting the load-bearing ideas, the small set of concepts in each field that explain most of what it does. How compounding works in money, what a feedback loop is, or the selfish gene theory in biology, what incentives do to behavior in economics, why evolution has no fixed goal. Each of those take an evening to understand, not a lifetime, and each one is a lens. A different way of looking at whatever is in front of you. A specialist owns a microscope, one instrument, incredible magnification pointed at one thing. I want you to assemble a camera bag. Wide lens, macro lens, and the camera. The scene doesn't change. What you can see in it does. Now, where do you get the lenses? For me personally, books are a great source. And some of those documentary-style long-form YouTube videos our generation normally scrolls past. The Wikipedia hole you actually let yourself fall down on a Sunday is another way I personally do it. And here's the part that might land strangely. Most curious people already do this by accident. So if you're the kind of person with 17 open tabs on unrelated subjects in your browser, you weren't unfocused, you were collecting, you were being curious. Nobody had told you what for. Move 2. Connect. This is the engine to turn curiosity into a concept. And it's a single question. You take one life problem from your own lane and ask, what does this look like through one of the other lenses? The idea is to widen your perception of that one thing. Sometimes another person's perspective does that. Other times it's just a different angle on the same object. The Wright brothers ran exactly this play. Everyone in aviation was asking, how do we make this machine powerful enough to fly? The Wright brothers had spent years watching customers wobble down the street on 2 wheels and stay upright. So they asked a bicycle question instead. How do we make this machine balanced enough to steer? Same problem, different lens. And the different lens turned out to be worth more than $50,000 of pure expertise at the time. The Wright brothers had breadth of perspective and the ability to connect different kind of concepts across it. You already do a small version of this every time you catch yourself saying it's basically like. Ice cream is basically like frozen milk and cream with sugar. Habits are basically compound interest, tiny deposits, absurd returns denominated in reps instead of dollars. Attention is basically like a budget that refills every morning, and every app you open is a spend. The moment you say it's basically like, you're connecting. The skill is doing it on purpose to problems that matter to you. I'll be honest, making connections is close to my heart. It's the precursor to me launching this YouTube channel 4 months ago, connecting ideas from philosophy, modern psychology, and neuroscience to brew something that helps you poise up. And it's become the signature thread of this channel now. My earlier video on how knowledge rewrites identity goes deep on this exact distinction. Move 3. Compress. When a connection actually lands, you write it down as a rough note. Writing it down is how you find out whether the connection is solid or just felt clever for a second. Start with one sentence, like habits are compounding interest in reps, or attention is a budget that refills every morning. That sentence is a framework and it's yours because nobody else stands at your exact intersection of experiences. So nobody else compresses quite the way you do. This is where original thinking actually comes from. And it took me embarrassingly long to see it. Almost everything is already known by somebody. Originality is mostly connecting two or more known things that nobody had bothered to introduce and compressing the introduction into a line that people can carry easily. So to rewind, collect, connect, and compress. That's the entire framework, and you could leave right now and be ahead of most of the advice on this topic. But stay, because the evidence is honestly delightful, and it starts with what Nobel Prize winners do on their weekends. So, the study that made me laugh. A researcher at Michigan State named Robert Root Burstein spent years comparing Nobel Prize winning scientists with ordinary working scientists. Not their lab habits, their hobbies. And the gap is absurd. The Nobel laureates were about 22 times more likely to have a serious performing hobby, music, acting, dance, than the average scientist. Not 22% more likely, 22 times. And the pattern held for writing, for painting, for craft work, the very best people in the deepest fields were also reliably the widest. They value breadth alongside depth, which is strange, right? The niche advice says every hour at the piano is an hour stolen from the lab. The data says the piano players win the prizes. It only works if the piano is doing something for the lab. Hold that thought, because the mechanism is coming. But first, let me be fair to the other side, because the niche people are half right, and I don't want to sell you a fantasy. You do need depth somewhere. One lane where you've earned real competence, where you know what quality feels like from the inside. Breadth with no depth stays shallow. The Wright brothers weren't dabblers wandering into aviation. They were world-class precision mechanics. That was their deep lane, and every lens they carried got pointed at it. The move was never breadth instead of depth. The move is breadth wrapped around depth. Going deep is step one. Staying narrow is the mistake. Here's the mechanism in one sentence. Insight is mostly analogy. When your brain meets a new problem, it hunts for an old structure it already understands and maps it across. That's how thinking actually operates, and you can watch your own mind do it. The last time you understood something new fast, I'd bet the feeling arrived as, it's like that other thing. This isn't a new idea, by the way. 2,500 years ago, Aristotle was trying to name what separates a genius from a competent craftsman. And he landed on exactly this. He wrote that the greatest thing by far is to be a master of metaphor, and that it's the one thing that can't be taught because it's a sign of genius, since a good metaphor means an eye for the resemblance between things. Sit with that. The oldest definition of genius we have written down isn't knowing more than everyone. It's seeing that this is secretly like that. which, if you cut it, is the exact move you just watched the Wright brothers make. And now we can watch it happen inside the skull. A neuroscientist named Roger Beatty ran a study where people invented original ideas while their brains were scanned. The most creative people were not lighting up one gifted region. They were doing something harder. They were linking 3 brain networks that normally take turns and rarely fire together. The one that wanders free, the one that focuses and judges, and the one that flags what's worth attention. Creativity doesn't occur in a single spot. It was connection across systems that usually don't talk to each other. And the links were strong enough that they could predict how creative someone was just from the neural wiring. Read that back. Your brain is physically either building bridges across itself or it isn't, which also explains why depth alone plateaus. If every structure you own comes from one field, every new problem gets mapped onto the same few shapes. You've heard the line about how to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That's a real, measured cognitive effect. Experts get captured by their own best-known solution, and the deeper the expertise, the stronger the capture. The connector escapes it for free because the connector has more shapes to reach for. Want the cleanest example in history? The story goes that Gutenberg built the printing press by connecting 2 things that already existed: the wine press and the coin punch. Winemakers had owned presses for hundreds of years. Mint workers stamped coins every day. 2 mature technologies sitting in different buildings, waiting to be connected. The revolution was the introduction of connection. And with AI becoming more accessible, it matters more than ever. The narrow part of expertise, the memorized part, the pattern inside one lane part, is exactly the part machines just got very good at, and doing it at very cheap cost as well. The head of people at one of the largest employers on the planet said out loud recently that AI is going to make office roles broader, not narrower. The market is quietly starting to price that one thing the machines don't do well yet, which is judgment across contexts, the connection across multitude of concepts. And underneath the career case, there's a quieter thing, and it's the one I actually care about. Breadth is what gives depth its meaning. I had to learn this the hard way by drilling one lane for years and wondering why the work felt airless. Your one field on its own is a room. Every lens you collect is a window cut into it. The room doesn't get less deep when you add windows. It gets light. And if you're a weirdo like me, you learn to love the big, wide, old-school windows. There's an old image for this that I love, and it's worth borrowing. The Buddhist teacher said something called Indra's net. Picture an endless net stretched across the universe, and at every single knot, a jewel. And every jewel reflects every other jewel in the entire net, so that touching one makes all of them shimmer. Sound like anything? That is what a connected mind is actually like on the inside. Your inside. Every idea you hold reflecting all the others. Nothing sitting alone in a drawer. The highest kind of seeing was never zooming in. It's catching the one thread that runs through everything until the world stops being a pile of disconnected facts and starts being a single fabric. Scattered is 1,000 tabs and no thread. Connected is one single thread running through the entire fabric. Integrated is the same 1,000 tabs with the thread pulled through. Same curiosity, completely different mind. And if you've seen my last video, you'll recognize the shape, because this is the compounding self again. Your odd combination of interests was never the liability the niche advice made it sound like. It might be the only thing about your work nobody can copy, because nobody else stands where you stand. Lanes are crowded. Intersections are not. So if you've arrived at one, be proud of it. So here's the habit. 1 hour a week. I call it the connector hour. And if you ran the 168 audit from the last video, this is a 2-word hour. Probably the highest paying one on the board. First 30 minutes, collect. Feed yourself one thing from a field you know nothing about. A TED Talk, a book chapter, a long article. Picking it should feel slightly random, like it just happened to you and you stumbled across it. Next 20 minutes, connect. Take one live problem from your deep lane and ask the bridge question. How would this field see my problem? What's their version of my problem? Scribble badly. Badly is totally fine. Last 10 minutes, compress. One sentence in your own words into a running note. Like, X is basically like Y because of Z. Most weeks the sentence will be mediocre, and that's fine. You're not trying to be brilliant on schedule. You're building a reflex, and reflexes compound over time. And if a full hour is rich for your season of life right now, shrink it. Allow yourself to have 15 minutes. One article, one sentence. The reflex is the point, not the runtime. The template for the log is in the description below for free. So that's the connector mind for you. Collect lenses from everywhere. Connect them to the lane you know best. And compress what you find into sentences that you can carry. In 1903, the specialists had the credentials, the funding, and the wrong question. Two bicycle mechanics had the right question because they carried a lens nobody else in aviation owned. That's the pattern, and it hasn't stopped repeating since. The specialist gets very good at answering the question. A connector notices it was the wrong question. Depth is how you get good. Breadth is how you get original. And original was never about knowing what nobody knows. It's two things everybody knew, finally introduced together by the one person who happened to be standing in both rooms or at the intersection. I want you to drop the two most unrelated interests you carry in the comments below. The weirder the pair, the better, because that pair is probably where your best ideas are hiding. If this reframed something for you, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.